Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. The scent of pine and damp earth was Elias Thorne's sanctuary. For 10 years, he'd called the rickety, three-bedroom cabin tucked deep in the Blackwood Preserve his home. A freelance nature photographer, his days were spent in quiet observation, his evenings editing photos by the glow of a crackling fire, the only companion his scruffy terrier mix, Buster. Life was simple, predictable, and profoundly isolated, exactly how he liked it, until the lights began. It started subtly, as these things always do, a whisper before a scream. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer on the periphery of his vision, high above the dense canopy of ancient oaks and towering pines. He'd dismiss it as a distant plane, perhaps a satellite, or even atmospheric optics playing tricks on his tired eyes after a long day tracking deer. But the shimmer persisted, an unnatural glint of silver against the deepening twilight, silent and unmoving. It wasn't a plane. Planes hummed, they cast shadows, they moved with purpose. This was just there. Buster was the first to truly notice. A loyal, goofy creature, usually oblivious to anything beyond his next meal or a squirrel to chase, he became agitated during these twilight hours. His low, rumbling growl, barely audible at first, grew into a frustrated whine directed not at the forest, but at the sky. His fur would bristle, his tail tucked low, an ancient, primal fear radiating from him. Elias would stroke his head, murmuring reassurances, but the dog would tremble, eyes wide, fixed on something Elias couldn't quite discern. Then came the silence. The preserve, normally a symphony of cicadas, crickets, and rustling leaves, would fall utterly, completely silent. Not the natural quiet of a winter night, but an oppressive, heavy silence, as if all life held its breath. The air itself would feel wrong. Static, perhaps, a subtle hum that vibrated in his teeth, a pressure behind his eyes. It was during these silences that the light seemed to pulse, no longer just a shimmer, but a distinct, geometrical form, impossibly high, yet somehow closer. Elias tried to rationalize it. He was a man of science, a man of empirical evidence. He checked weather reports for unusual phenomena, scoured forums for local military exercises, even considered if he was overworking himself, his mind playing tricks. But the feeling of unease, of being watched, began to creep into his waking hours. He'd be focusing his camera on a dew-kissed spiderweb, and a cold shiver would run down his spine. He'd glance up, but nothing. Just the familiar trees, the familiar sky. Yet the feeling persisted, like a phantom limb always there. The electrical disturbances followed. His old radio, a relic that usually picked up clear static-filled country music, began to emit strange, discordant wails. Sometimes a voice not quite human would surface from the static, a garbled series of clicks and whistles that scraped against his eardrums. His cabin lights would flicker violently, not like a power surge, but as if an invisible hand was rapidly flipping the switch. One night his laptop, fully charged, abruptly died in the middle of an editing session. When he plugged it in, it burst back to life, the screen displaying a corrupted image of a perfectly circular, dark object against a starry sky. He hadn't taken that photo, he'd never even seen anything like it. He began documenting, not just with his camera, which seemed to fail him precisely when he needed it most, battery dead, memory card corrupted, lens fogged, but with notes. Scrawled observations in a worn journal, dates, times, descriptions. The journal became his anchor, a way to prove to himself he wasn't losing his mind. He photographed the strange, perfectly circular patches of dead grass that started appearing near the edge of his property, as if something immense had pressed down, scorching the earth beneath. The grass around the circles was vibrantly green, untouched. They weren't natural. Buster, bless his loyal heart, was becoming increasingly distressed. He stopped eating, his once playful barks replaced by constant whimpering. He would often stare intently at empty corners of the room, his head cocked, occasionally letting out a soft growl. Elias would follow his gaze, seeing only shadows, but Buster would cower, pressing himself against Elias' leg, eyes wide with terror. Then Buster disappeared. It was a Tuesday. Elias had left him outside, as usual, for his morning run in the woods. He whistled for him an hour later, then two, then three. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He searched for hours, calling Buster's name until his voice was hoarse. He scoured every familiar path, every dense thicket. Nothing. Not a footprint, not a trace of fur, not even the faint scent Elias knew so well. It was as if Buster had simply vanished into thin air. That night the silence was absolute. No crickets, no rustling leaves, no wind through the pines, just the hollow echo of his own frantic breathing. And then a sound. Not a voice, not a hum, but a presence, an awareness. It pressed down on him from above, from outside, from everywhere. It felt like being submerged in cold, dark water, unable to breathe, yet somehow he wasn't drowning. He was being perceived. He barricaded himself in the cabin, drawing the blinds, locking the door, piling chairs against it. He knew it was futile. Whatever was out there, it wasn't deterred by deadbolts. He sat in the dark, clutching his hunting rifle, its cold metal a useless comfort. He wanted to scream, to run, but his limbs felt heavy, weighted down by an invisible force. His mind raced, replaying every strange light, every unearthly sound, every inexplicable moment. It all clicked into place, forming a terrifying mosaic of alien intrusion. They weren't just watching, they were here. The next few weeks became a waking nightmare. Sleep offered no escape. His dreams were filled with impossible geometries, cold metal rooms, and a feeling of profound violation. He'd wake up in a sweat, heart pounding, the memory of slender, gray figures standing over him, their heads too large, their eyes too black, too deep, lingering at the edge of his consciousness. But were they dreams? Or memories he was struggling to suppress? He started finding things, small, metallic objects, smooth and cold, without seam or inscription, left on his porch. He dropped them, burning his fingers on the impossible chill. They would vanish by morning. He found strange patterns carved into the bark of his oldest oak tree, intricate symbols that pulsed faintly with an inner light, only visible in the deep twilight. They were gone by sunrise, replaced by smooth, unblemished bark. His sanity was fraying thread by thread. He tried to leave. He packed a bag, threw it into his old pickup truck, and started the engine. It sputtered, coughed, and died. He tried again and again, nothing. He checked the fuel, the battery, everything he knew about cars. All seemed fine. He walked around the truck, kicking the tires, swearing under his breath. He got back in, tried one last time. The engine roared to life, a mocking symphony of mechanical triumph. He jammed it into reverse, spun gravel, and sped down the long, winding dirt road. He drove for hours, convinced he was making progress. The sun rose, then began its descent again. He should have reached the highway hours ago, but the landscape remained stubbornly familiar. The same towering pines, the same winding turns, the same occasional deer darting across his path. He knew this road, he'd driven it 1,000 times, but it was looping, always looping back. Every turn, every landmark seemed to bring him back to a place he'd just left. The dread was a living thing in his chest, squirming, suffocating. He pulled over, exhausted and defeated, the truck sputtering to a halt precisely where he'd started that morning, just a few hundred yards from his cabin. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent hues of orange and purple. The silence descended once more, thick and heavy. He saw them then, not a craft, not a light, but a ripple in the air at the edge of the tree line, like heat haze, but it was cold, a distortion, a shimmer, a displacement. And within it, the faint outline of figures, taller than human, impossibly thin, their heads too large, their movements fluid and unnatural. They weren't walking, they were gliding. He scrambled back into his truck, fumbling for the keys, but his hands were shaking too violently. The engine wouldn't turn over. It was a cruel joke. He pressed himself against the seat, whimpering, his eyes fixed on the approaching distortions. They weren't just figures, they were like holes in reality, moving towards him. A voice entered his mind, not through his ears, but directly into his consciousness, a cold, dry whisper that bypassed language, speaking directly to his deepest fears. "We are here, we have always been here, you have been observed, you are interesting." He cried out, a guttural sound torn from his throat. He covered his ears as if that would stop the telepathic assault, but it only intensified. The images flashed in his mind, Buster lying still on a metallic slab, his eyes vacant. The intricate symbols on the trees, now glowing with an internal, sickening light. The circular patches of dead grass pulsing with a faint, low hum. They were all connected, all their doing. The distortions reached the truck. The air around them crackled with an unseen energy, raising the hair on his arms, filling his nostrils with a scent like ozone and old metal. He could feel their presence, cold and ancient, pressing in on him, invading his personal space, his very being. His vision blurred, his head swam. He felt a sharp, piercing pain behind his eyes, like a needle being driven into his brain. He tried to fight, to thrash, but his body wouldn't obey. He was paralyzed, a marionette with severed strings. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He could only watch as a long, impossibly thin appendage, like a dark shadow given form, reached through the truck window. It didn't break the glass, it seemed to phase through it, its touch impossibly cold, devoid of warmth or life. It touched his forehead. A flood of images, sensations, and knowledge, not his own, cascaded into his mind. Nebulae spun, galaxies twisted, stars exploded and reformed. He saw the vastness of space, the terrifying emptiness, and the intricate, terrifying order of their existence. They weren't just aliens. They were architects, engineers of reality, ancient beyond comprehension, their morality an alien concept, their purpose unfathomable to a mere human. He saw himself, a microscopic blip, a specimen under a cosmic microscope. He saw Buster not dead but repurposed, integrated. The pain was unbearable, a tearing of his mind from his body. He felt himself being lifted, not physically but spiritually. His very consciousness was being unspooled, analyzed, dissected. He was no longer Elias Thorne, nature photographer. He was data. He was a resource. Then blackness. He awoke, sprawled on the cold, damp forest floor. The sun was rising, casting long, familiar shadows through the trees. He lay there for a long time, listening to the birds chirp, the wind rustle through the leaves, the familiar sounds of the preserve. He felt empty, cleaned out. Like a slate wiped bare, he pushed himself up, his muscles aching, his head throbbing. He stumbled towards his cabin, the scene of his torture. Everything looked normal. The truck was parked outside, exactly where he'd left it. The cabin door was ajar. He walked inside. The fireplace was cold. His laptop sat on the table, still open to the photo editing software. His journal lay open beside it, his frantic handwriting filling the pages. He picked it up, reading his own words. They are here, they are watching, they are coming for me. He stared at the words, but they didn't resonate. They felt like someone else's madness, someone else's fear. He closed the journal. He didn't remember writing it. He didn't remember any of it. He went to the kitchen and made himself coffee, the familiar ritual, a comforting balm. He sat at the table, sipping the hot liquid, looking out at the woods. The trees looked beautiful, bathed in the morning light. The silence now was peaceful. He felt calm, profoundly, deeply calm, no fear, no paranoia, no unease, just an overwhelming sense of acceptance. Then he noticed the small, metallic object on the kitchen counter, next to his coffee cup. Smooth, cold, without seam or inscription. He reached for it, his fingers brushing against its impossibly chilly surface. This time it didn't burn. This time it felt right, familiar. He picked it up. It hummed faintly in his palm, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated not just in his hand, but deep within his chest, within his bones. A feeling of recognition washed over him, not a memory, but an instinct. He brought it closer, examining its flawless surface. Reflected in the metallic sheen, for a fleeting moment he saw them. Not the terrifying, distorted figures of his supposed nightmares, but a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer in his own eyes, a subtle shift in the light, a silent, knowing intelligence looking back at him from his own reflection. He smiled. A slow, chilling smile that felt alien on his own face. The cold object pulsed in his hand, a silent beacon. He was home, and he was no longer alone. He would never be alone again. Buster's name, he realized, still felt distant, a word without meaning, a memory that wasn't his own. He walked to the window, the metallic object still in his hand, and gazed out at the Blackwood Preserve. The silence was absolute. He wasn't watching the trees anymore. He was listening to them, and beyond them. Waiting, their eyes, now his, saw everything, and soon they would perceive more, so much more. He was ready.